Well, good morning and welcome to the City Planning Commission public hearing. Mr. Secretary, if we could begin.
Good morning, Chair Lago and members of the New York City Planning Commission. This City Planning Commission public hearing is being held in Spector Hall at 22 Reade Street in Lower Manhattan. Today is Wednesday, April 26, 2017. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and beepers. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card at the desk outside of Spector Hall. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago.
Here.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Besser.
Here.
Commissioner Cantor. Commissioner Cirillo.
Here.
Commissioner De La Hoz. Commissioner Dweck.
Here.
Commissioner Eady. Commissioner Efron.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, April 5th, 2017.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved.
Scheduling on calendar numbers 1 to 13, we have resolutions for adoption scheduling Wednesday, May 10th, 2017, for a public hearing to be held at Spector Hall, 22 Reade Street.
On this resolution, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution is adopted.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 18. Reports, Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 14, CD1 N160282, ZRK, in the matter of an application for an amendment of the zoning resolution concerning 1315 Greenpoint Avenue. For a favorable report on calendar number 14, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor.
Yes.
Commissioner Cirillo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 14. Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 15, 16, and 17. CD2, calendar number 15, C 170235 ZSM. Calendar number 16, C 170236 ZSM. Calendar number 17, N 170237 ZSM. And the matter of applications for the grant of special permits concerning 359, 361, and 357 Canal Streets. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 15, 16, and 17, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor.
Yes.
Commissioner Cirillo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 15, 16, and 17. Calendar number 18, Borough of Manhattan, CD5, N170321 HKM, and the matter of a communication concerning the landmark designation of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel interiors. On the adoption of calendar number 18 for referral to the City Council, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor.
Yes.
Commissioner Cirillo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 18 has been adopted. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 19, CD9, N170297 HKM, and the matter of communication concerning the landmark designation of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. On the adoption of calendar 19 for referral to the City Council, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor. Commissioner Cirillo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 19 has been adopted. Calendar number 20, Borough of Manhattan, CD 7, 9, CD 7 and 9, N170298 HKM, and the matter of communication concerning the landmark designation of the Morningside Historic District. On the adoption of calendar number 20 for referral to the City Council, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser?
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor?
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo?
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie?
Yes, and Madam Chair, if I may, be recorded voting in the affirmative on the prior items.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Efron?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Calendar number 20 has been adopted. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 21, CD5 N160089 ZAM. In the matter of an application for the grant of an authorization concerning 110 East 16th Street for the adoption of calendar number 21, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 21 has been adopted. Calendar numbers 22 and 23, Borough of the Bronx, CD 8. Calendar number 22, N170322ZCX. Calendar number 23, N170323ZCX. In the matter of applications for the grant of certifications concerning 5525 Independence Avenue for the adoption of calendar numbers 21 and 22. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Besser.
Yes.
Commissioner Cantor.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Calendar numbers 22 and 23 have been adopted. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 26. Borough of Queens, calendar numbers 24 and 25, CD3, number 24, C170162 ZMQ, number 25, N170163 ZMQ, in the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 74-04 Northern Boulevard rezoning.
And the first speaker making the presentation is Richard Bass.
I have to get larger boards. Good morning, Madam Chair. Commissioners, I'm Richard Bass. I'm with Aikman LLP. I'm representing the applicant H&M LLC, which is developing the proposed commercial and community facility development known as 74-04 Northern Boulevard. The applicant is requesting two approvals, a zoning map change and an amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution. Not to be confused, we're building an office building, but because it's a C zoning district that permits residential use, we also have to amend Appendix F in compliance with the MIH regulations. The development is located on the south side of Northern Boulevard between 74th and 75th Street. It's approximately 20,000 square feet. It's currently a car wash. It's been a car wash since the 50s. It's a .5 FAR. The current zoning is C81. The zoning hasn't changed since it was adopted in 1961. Northern Boulevard is 200 feet wide, and a C81 is a 1 FAR commercial and a 2.4 FAR community facility. The actions we're asking you to approve today would permit a 90,000 mixed-use commercial and community facility building. It would be approximately 64,000 square feet of Class A office space, which is really needed in this community, and approximately 18,000 square feet of community facility space. There will be approximately 8,000 square feet of parking. I'm here with the owner, the architect, and several speakers representing elected officials, and one of our tenants who will speak in favor. The community board voted in favor of this application. We met multiple times with the land use committee before we went to the full board, and the borough president also supports this application. We're proposing a change from a C81 to a C43 that would allow for a maximum community facility mixed-use building of 4.8 FAR. The land use rationale for this building goes to the fact that the zoning is old and antiquated. Northern Boulevard can sustain additional development. Queens City Planning is studying Northern Boulevard. We had discussions whether we want to be included in that study. They're a couple years out. My client wants to build an office building, now. He's done 40 to 50 various developments in Queens. He's known in the community. So in terms of some of the concerns on aesthetics or community impacts, he's of the neighborhood. I think that's it for my presentation. I can go through the boards, or if you have questions, I know there were some questions for Monday.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Cantor.
Will the owner be speaking?
Excuse me?
Will the developer be speaking?
If there's questions to the owner, I didn't sign him up, but if you would like to speak to the owner, I'll bring him up.
Please.
Okay, we actually will
Okay.
go in order of the speakers. We'll go in the order of 5 in favor, 5 against. And so if you could register the owner, and we'll add this to the list.
Okay.
Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
Richard, what kind of community facility is contemplated here?
Right now, it's LGBT network. They'll be speaking. This community has a large gay and lesbian community. There's been some violence onto the community, and we thought that they would be a really good tenant for this building. They're looking for space, and they represent this community. I'll have them speak further about what their vision is for the space and how they would represent this community.
Commissioner Levin.
So, Richard, that leads to my question. Of course, you're only applying for a rezoning.
That is correct.
So the images that you have shown us don't necessarily have to get built as you've shown us.
That is also
But you're certainly sensitive to the complicated community outreach process that you went through to get here. What assurances can you give us and the local community that the various commitments, although maybe not legally binding, but the various commitments you've made to the community about the appearance and performance and shape of the building will be actually implemented?
That's always a good question. First of all, the applicant is established in the community, and if he was a one-off, you may have more weight on that question, but he has to live in this community. So he's building a building that, one, will make money for him, but also respects the community, because he wants to do other development in the community. The community outreach wasn't just pro forma. We actually adopted many of the suggestions that the community board and the neighbors had in terms of the treatment between our building and the residential community, in terms of circulation, so that the cars would come in the building and then exit and go back to Northern Boulevard. That's a little commonsensical, because we don't want the building's generated traffic to go into the residential neighborhood, so we'll circulate through the building back onto Northern Boulevard. In terms of, I promise, that's all this process permits. This is not a site plan, but this is reputation and stature. Because if I come before you next time and the building is really horrific, you will remind me of this discussion.
Commissioner Efron.
I appreciate the community reconnaissance angle of your response, but I do have a question about the design as presented. I'm hoping it's just artistic license and those are not actually lights on the 2 layers.
I don't believe they are.
Okay. You're confirming they're not.
I'm confirming that.
Thank you.
As the zoning consultant, I think he might have something to say about
Right.
that. Other questions from Commissioner Osteen?
Commissioner Efron, many of the practitioners in the audience and our practice at Ackerman, we do community outreach. I come from a political activist background. It's smart and it's good business.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, I would like to note that, the community board, there was some discussion, it seems, in the community board, and there were some concerns raised. There were 17 in favor, 8 opposed, 5 abstaining. Could you speak to the concerns of the community board?
Some of the concerns were with the loading dock in terms of orchestrating that. Some of the concerns were with the rear the wall facing the residential community. We didn't want to have a blank wall, so we have it articulated. We have space between the host community and our building, and it will be planted. And also, the intention is to plant so that ultimately ultimately that this rear wall will be greened so that people living next to it won't face even an articulated wall.
And I note, you know, you're not in the historic district, but you're near the historic district, and there have been a number of concerns raised about sort of aesthetics, and is, you know, as we've noted, that you're not showing us the design, but, you know, does the developer have sensitivity to these particular issues?
We believe we do, and again, as this design is really for illustrative purposes, we can continue to have those discussions as we skin the building. We, again, tried to find a material and a color palette that fit the neighborhood, so that this building wasn't just plunked down from some other community, but that reflected some of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Other commissioners? If not, thank you, Mr. Bass, and we'll now call our next speaker in support, Alexandra Casey.
Hello. My name is Alexandra Casey. I'm representing Assemblyman Den Decker, who represents this district. The Assemblyman also lives 5 blocks away from the building site and has for the past 50 years. You know that. He says, "Dear Commissioners, I respectfully submit this letter in support of the developer H&M LLC's proposal to rezone 7404 Northern Boulevard, Block 1247, Lot 1, from a C81 zoning district to a C43 zoning district to facilitate the development of new mixed-use retail, community facility, and office development. The rezoning proposal will bring new job growth and economic opportunities to my district in Western Queens. The rezoning will support the development of prime retail and office space and increase local jobs that will improve and enhance the overall quality of our neighborhood along Northern Boulevard, one of the busiest commercial thoroughfares in my district, on a site between 74th and 75th Street that has been historically underutilized. I support the 7404 Northern Boulevard rezoning proposal, in my district, and encourage the city to consider the benefits that this proposal will bring to our community. Sincerely, Assemblyman Michael Den Decker." Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Casey? If not, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then we'll move on to our next speaker in support, Tom Gretsch.
Morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. My name is Tom Gretsch. I represent the Queens Chamber of Commerce, the largest and oldest business association in Queens County, celebrating our 106th year this year. I respectfully submit this letter in support of H&M LLC's proposal to rezone 7404 Northern Boulevard for the development of a mixed-use retail and community facility and office development containing approximately 91,000 square feet of floor space and 219 parking spaces. This proposal will stimulate economic growth and bring new jobs to the northwestern part of Queens. The rezoning will support the development of prime office space and increase local jobs that will improve and overall enhance the quality of our neighborhood along Northern Boulevard, one of the busiest commercial thoroughfares between 74th and 75th Street. Many businesses in Queens cannot find suitable office space, and this project will be much needed quality office space with parking. Further, this application will revitalize a site that has been underutilized and provide an important economic anchor to this area of Northeast Queens. Respectfully submitted.
Any questions for Mr. Gretsch? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Our next speaker in support is David Kalmanek.
Hi, good morning, Chair and Commission, Commissioners. My name's David Kelnick. I'm the founder and also the Chief Executive Officer of the LGBT Network, which would be the community facility piece of this development, and of course we're here to speak in support. Just tell you a little bit about the LGBT Network. I founded this organization when I was studying for my master's in social work at Stony Brook University. and created a project, a curriculum to go out into the schools to talk about what it was like to grow up LGBT. In 1993, the T wasn't in the picture, but LGBT. And what we found was that many of the kids in these workshops would shuffle their papers, hit them on the floor, and wait for everyone else to leave so they could come up and ask the gay speaker a question. And that question was the same exact question no matter where we conducted the workshop. And that question was, is there any place that I could go to meet other people just like myself? And back then there wasn't. And now through the organization that started 24 years ago, the organization operates 4 LGBT centers in Long Island and Queens. The one that we have in Queens is in Little Neck. So it's in Queens, barely in Queens, but it's in Queens. And for the past 3-4 years, folks in this particular area have been pleading for us to open up a center for support services for our youth to get, youth and seniors to get services, to get involved, for leadership programs, and for also the rising hate crimes that we're seeing, that we've seen over the years, but particularly more since the election last November. And we have been searching for 3 years to find space in this particular area. And while there is space available, there is no way that we can afford that as a nonprofit organization. What this facility will allow us to do is open up an LGBT center that will support the entire community, not only the LGBT folks themselves, but their families, and work with all of the other community organizations, places of worship, and businesses in the district to make the entire place a safer place for LGBT families.
Thank you. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Deleuze.
Hi, sorry to be arriving a bit late. Can you just talk about how many square feet you'll occupy and how long of a lease you anticipate having, and a little bit more about the services that'll be provided?
Sure. So right now we're anticipating occupying 5,000 square feet of the community facility. We're hoping that we understand that construction takes a while, so we'll probably negotiate more space so that when the facility does open, it may be double that we would be able to occupy. And the services that would be provided are everything from HIV testing to youth leadership programs, and that's LGBT and allied youth, to support the local schools as well, and counseling and other groups, and programs for families as well. There are more and more parents getting involved in our programs. On Long Island, we have what's called the Long Island Gay PTSA. It's the only PTA in the entire country that is chartered to focus in on LGBT youth, and we're already making policy changes nationally for LGBT youth. So the goal is, in this facility, we don't have the space in Queens yet, is to expand that into a borough-wide or perhaps even a citywide LGBT PTSA too.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Cantor.
Thank you. Are you asking the developer for any special, for lack of a better word, I guess, security created opportunity? Are you asking for anything relative to increasing safety in the building design itself?
One of the things, I started this organization 24 years ago, and I think one of the reasons that we've been so successful, we're the second largest LGBT health and human service organization in the state, is because we don't lead by fear and we don't plan by fear. We certainly plan for safety, and I believe that the safety that will be provided to everyone in the building probably will be good enough for us as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other commissioners?
It's really the safety outside of our center that we really need to be out, and that's
Right.
part of,
I wasn't
yeah.
thinking internal, I was thinking exterior.
Oh, yeah, well, then we're on the same page, yes. Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kelnick.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker who has registered is Chris Papa, the architect, if there are questions of the architect from the commission. If- Okay, Mr. Papa?
Commissioners. Christopher Papa, architect.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you give us a history, please, of how it came about that you are, I'll use the word, giving up occupable floor area with parking above grade? And I recognize you've got commercial below grade, but I'd like to learn the genesis. This is also, I think, an E-site.
E-designation site, yes, for the parking to be fully enclosed, mechanically ventilated. Because it's not located in the cellar, I think that your question is, why is the parking not being located in the cellar rather than the second and third floor? We're getting the...
You're giving up FAR effectively by doing that.
Yes, and also because of the height restriction, but we felt in discussion with the owner also, and he could speak to that also, that it's a little bit more cost-effective even to locate the parking above grade rather than to provide shoring. I mean, we were really talking about 3 levels of parking that we're providing with the stacker on 1 floor, that an excavation to go that deep would be very cost prohibitive. In addition, we feel that, you know, the retail is a little bit more valuable to be able to provide a storage area in the cellar for the retail space, so it's a little bit more attractive to get a commercial tenant that way. So those 2 factors, I think, offset the sacrifice in the floor area and to you know, be able to provide something aesthetically pleasing also. Right, and also there is perhaps a high water table there, so we don't want to go too low and encounter subsoil conditions that would be a problem with water.
Are you going to have to do remediation now?
Not that I'm aware of. We're not excavating to that depth. We're talking about a regular conventional depth. I would say maybe a 12-foot excavation as opposed to, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know.
Richard, didn't they also have
The E-designation was, the E-designation was, we requested it to.
Please leave the questioning with the current speaker.
He can't speak to the E-designation.
Oh, the
can come back.
E designation, I believe, was volunteered as part of the EAS, part of the application, not existing prior to the proposal for this building.
the reason for that question is, if indeed you have to do remediation, you might be digging down anyhow.
The remediation in terms of, I'm not following what you're asking in terms of the remediation.
If you're going to have to remediate the site, you're going to have to do some digging out, removal, and replacement.
Well, I think the E designation is not relative to soil conditions. I believe it's for environmental, you know, the mechanical ventilation of the parking.
Commissioner Cantor will have Mr. Bass sign up again as a speaker, and I think he'll be able to address these questions. Yes, Commissioner O'Keefe.
Quick question, are you anticipating ventilating these spaces, the retail spaces? Are you anticipating potential restaurant uses, or?
Potential restaurant uses, no, not really. We just have general retail proposed. What the eventual tenant is going to be, I couldn't really.
So the spaces will not be ventilated to accommodate potential
As far as I
eating
know, not a
establishments?
restaurant use mechanically, but obviously regular air conditioning, heating, ventilation.
Yeah, but it could not accommodate restaurant uses at the time.
I wouldn't say that it couldn't, but it's not proposed at this time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Papas. We will now call speakers in opposition. Seth Berkowitz, please.
Hello, thank you so much for hearing me. I'm a homeowner on 74th Street, the affected block. So this would end cap the block that I live on. What's not shown in the rendering behind, maybe in some of the other documents. It's all attached single-family homes built in 1940. And so my main question here, some of these concerns were brought up at the community board meeting, but may not be represented in the documentation going forward, is how is the scale of this proposal appropriate for the immediate surroundings? There's actually a fairly low-density area along northern in that corridor, mostly automotive, small single-family homes, some two-family homes. And most of the new construction, new businesses that have been put in recently, a medical office on 72nd and is about 2 stories. 87th, there's a new 3-story building which has a Denny's, a Chipotle, a preschool, I assume is lucrative for its developers. And so I'm just wondering how this 8 stories, which seems fairly out of line with everything else around it, and is set to loom over the yards of the residences immediately behind it, is appropriate for the neighborhood. We expressed these concerns to Community Board 3. They approved it. I don't know if they mentioned any of our concerns. Another smaller question, they approved it with some restrictions on deliveries between the hours of 10 and 2, and the means by which those are made. I also would ask about refuse collection, the flip side of that, because on 74th, between 73rd and 74th, is a single-story row of restaurants. They have private carting pickups at 9:45 p.m., 3 a.m., and very loud. And at the site right here is the car wash, which also has an additional private carting pickup at 11 p.m. at night. So with 2 small children, 1 and 3, it's already a loud area that we're trying to, make our way through the night in a quiet fashion. So I'm concerned about noise going forward. I'm concerned about scale. And I think that's about it. And I just want to, reiterate that not reflected in this, it's a very actually low-density area. As you move closer to 74th Street and Roosevelt, you start seeing higher density commercial closer to the train, like the Bruson building, which burned down and a lot of community groups were displaced. So I think that's about it. I would say that the residents are interested in something new there, but really scared of the scale of this project. And we entered a petition of the homeowners in the immediate area to the community board. If you're interested in entering into the record, it's not many, but it's a low-density block as far as our concerns in that area. Who can I give this to?
Thank you very much, Mr.
Sure.
Berkowitz. If you could give the petition to the secretary.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And any questions for Mr. Berkowitz? You're not off the hook yet. Commissioner Levin.
I don't really have a question, just a comment. I want to thank you for taking the time to come here today to
Sure.
testify, and thank you for putting in plain street-level terms the planning conundrum that we face
Sure.
in looking at an application like this. You've put a human face on the issues that I think we will be considering as we figure out what to do about this application.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Del
Mr. Berkowitz, I would just add that the community board did reflect those recommendations.
Oh, great. Okay.
Specific to the hours and the loading docks. So you were also heard there, and that
Yeah.
was formally included as part of their recommendation.
Okay, but nothing as far as height, which was a
Well,
lot of our...
the issue with height is that the current zoning also allows up to 8 stories.
The
Right.
C81?
Yeah, so it does. So part of the challenge here is that piece of it. Although it's not currently built to that, the current
Interesting.
zoning allows for that.
I mean, I'm new at all this, but I thought the FAR at C81 was pretty limited. But,
I'm reading the recommendation now, and it covers that.
interesting. Tall, skinny building. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions?
Any other questions from the commission? If not, thank you for your time and your
Okay.
testimony, Mr. Berkowitz.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
We now have some additional people to testify in support. Nick Wadowski, please.
Good morning, Chair Lago, Commissioners. I'm here on behalf of Councilman Cossack and Santanitas. Although this is not technically within our office's district, it is only a few blocks south, so it certainly affects our constituents as well. We are fully in support of this project. We think that the addition of needed office and commercial space will benefit the continued evolution of Queens' service economy and again, the need for space, to echo the comments of our colleagues in and out of government. Secondly, we are also very encouraged by the addition of the LGBT network to this project. You know, as a gentleman mentioned, their current space in Little Neck is a little onerous for some of our constituents who are looking for these services and want to be able to get to them, especially LGBT youth, who it's very hard for them to get out there. So to be able to bring those services to Western Queens would redound a great benefit to our constituents. So ultimately, we are in favor of this project.
Any questions for Mr. Witowski? Commissioner Ortiz?
So whose district is this in? Councilman Drum's
Yes.
district? Okay. Have there been any communication, has there been any communication between your office and their office on this? Do you know where he stands?
I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for him. I understand that he has been largely favorable. And yeah, my understanding is that...
I don't want to put you on the spot, so
Right,
I'm sorry.
but my understanding is that there is a general consensus among all local officials, including Councilman Drum, in favor of this project.
Thank you.
But for the record, I am here to speak
understand.
merely on behalf of Councilman Constantinides, so
The limits of your jurisdiction.
precisely.
Any other questions? Commissioner Delos?
I think this might be within your jurisdiction. Considering the sense that there's support, but there are some concerns that are very local that maybe are outside your district, do you know if there's an effort to try to address those concerns about loading and about refuse that could help mitigate some of the impacts on the immediately adjacent neighbors?
I mean, we have not been privy to those discussions specifically. However, hearing the comments of the developer, hearing the comments of CB3, who we've worked closely with, of course, we do overlap with CB3, even though we do not specifically in this case. I think that it sounds as if, they have done their due diligence, to a place that I think we would be satisfied with based on that.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Witowski. Our next speaker is Mark Misk, the owner.
Morning. I guess I'm here to take questions. Some of the concerns that were brought up.
Yes, Commissioner Cantor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Smith. I'm curious as to how it evolved that you gave up FAR in order to have parking on the second level.
Okay.
Third level.
As Christopher Papa said a little bit, we feel that having some storage space for the retail below grade would be more beneficial than having the parking when we can accomplish the parking above grade. We're still getting a sizable amount of FAR, on the upper floors. And we're actually leaving some FAR on the table because of the height restriction as per the FAA. So the main thought was to have the retail storage space in the cellar, as well as some of the concerns of the cost of construction in the excavation process with any possible high water table or a extra deep double layer excavation that might be 23, 25 feet deep when it'd be unnecessarily needed.
Will there be remediation requirements on that site?
Don't believe so.
No.
I have not had any encounter like that. There's been no reportings at the site of any kind.
Your engineering or architectural associates have not looked for any have not looked to determine whether remediation will be required? Because it used to be
Not further than a phase one that's been conducted, and that showed no
showed
no
no
issues.
remediation requirements.
Correct.
Thank you for coming, sir. Thank you for
No problem.
answering the question.
Any other questions?
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, your resident spoke to some concerns about the height, which we acknowledge you know, under current zoning, you can build this high, but the bulk, which is affected by, you know, the increase from 1 FAR for commercial uses to 3.4 FAR for commercial uses. That's a
Right.
pretty significant increase in FAR that you'd be receiving as a result of this rezoning. So did you look at anything in between? I mean, smaller bulk, is there a reason why you need this much
In between
additional
just
FAR?
wouldn't be financially viable. I know he spoke to a smaller development that was built on Northern Boulevard. I don't really know the economics of their situation, but here, I know that economically, we wouldn't be pursuing it, you know, for less of a bulk than what's here. As far as his concerns, I think things like the loading area that we went over with the planning commission of the community board, we addressed their concerns about loading. This is not, I think, maybe a little bit of a misconception among those community members that this is, they're gonna be getting tractor-trailer deliveries here like Costco or something like that. It's an office building mainly, and it's smaller, you know, we split up this first floor into smaller stores so as not to have a large retailer that's gonna require these huge deliveries. Probably gonna be more like box truck or van type of deliveries to the offices or to the retails. And so those are not really the noisy trucks that you normally would encounter in the delivery process. And all of that is gonna be taking place, you know, within the commercial area in the 100 feet of the corner of Northern Boulevard. So yeah, a truck would come down the block, but it would just back into a loading dock and out. It's not really gonna be obtrusive, and truck would back into the building. So not like it's gonna be on the street. It would be back in a loading bay. And as far as the rubbish removal as well, sort of the same thing. So you're getting rubbish removal now in the car wash, as it is, and it's outside. So here, there will be, you know, this is a ramp to enter the parking level. There will be some place for rubbish removal as well. That would be inside the building, and the truck would back in, get its garbage and come out. So it would probably be less obtrusive than even it is right now. As far as the effect of the houses in the back, you know, we went through that with the community board as well, and came up with a design that we thought would be more aesthetically pleasing to the eye and to the people. I understand that they're gonna be affected by the fact that there's gonna be a building there now. But fortunately, the shadows are cast onto Northern Boulevard, not onto them. And we tried to design the back of the building, so at least when they looked up, they would see something that is pleasing and aesthetically, you know, nice to look at.
How long have you owned this property?
Since 1997.
Thank you.
Commissioner Levin. Well, I guess, Mr. Nis, since you're here, I feel compelled to ask you the same question I asked Richard Bass, which this design has improved significantly since we first saw it and the ULURP process began. So I'm very pleased by that, but
Thank
that's of course not anything we can require you to do here at the Planning Commission as part of this rezoning. What assurance can you give us in the community that you're going to build, that you're going to follow through with the various representations that you've made to us in the community about how this building is going to be designed and how it's going to work?
Thank you. So like Richard spoke to a little bit, we've been in this community for over 40 years. My father before me, and my father actually lives in one of the historical district houses on 87th Street. And we know this area very well, and we've built in this area. We've done many multifamily homes around Corona and Jackson Heights and Elmhurst. We recently, a few years ago, also went through a ULURP process for another building on 75th Street, right near Broadway, that was built exactly as to the design that was approved by the city planning and that was gone through with the community board. So I believe our track record on that is pretty good. Is it going to be exactly what you're looking at here? You know, when we get into real design of the building, we'll know better, but are you going to get a glass box that's not going to fit in with the neighborhood? You're not. You're going to get something that's going to be in the style of what you're looking at, a more, you know, brick building with precast accents that's going to fit in the neighborhood. We also did a multifamily 80,000 square foot building in Corona on 108th Street that, to me, is the jewel of that neighborhood. I'm not patting myself on the back, but when you look at things that have been built, it stands out in the neighborhood, and it has gain some attention. And again, it's a brick building with precast. It's the federal style. It's sort of our trademark of what we do when you look at the type of developments that we put up. So we're in the neighborhood. We're not planning on going anywhere, and I think our track record speaks pretty well. You are?
Other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Misk.
Thank you.
That goes through our registered speakers, and I wonder if there's anyone else here who would want to be heard? If not, I'll note that staff will be able to follow up during the post-hearing session so that we can discuss some of the issues that were raised here. And with that, the hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 26, Community District 5, C 170112 ZSM, a public hearing in the matter of an application for the grant of a special permit concerning 242 West 53rd Street parking garage.
Our first speaker in favor is Paul Selver.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Paul Selver, partner in the law firm of Kramer Levin, and we're land use counsel for the applicant, Algen Management. Algen is seeking a special permit for a public parking garage pursuant to sections 1345 and 13451 of the zoning resolution. The proposed garage will be located at 242 West 52nd Street, which is right here. It is a U-shaped parcel located between 53rd and 52nd Street, between 8th Avenue and Broadway. The site is near the heart of the theater district, one of the city's most iconic neighborhoods, and one of its most important visitor attractions. The garage will be located in a mixed-use, predominantly residential building that is currently under construction. The building, as permitted, will contain 426 rental apartments, retail space, and an 89-space accessory parking garage on 2 below-grade levels. The garage will be accessed through a 15-foot wide curb cut on West 52nd Street. See that? Algen is proposing to operate the garage as a public parking garage of 184 spaces, including 36 electric charging stations. The changes in the capacity and operation of the garage will not, however, have any effect on the floor space it occupies or on the location or character of its access. Algen's application addresses in detail how the proposed garage meets the findings of sections 1345, and the related seeker review did not identify any traffic or other environmental impacts. We're happy to address any of those findings about which the Commission has questions. More importantly, the garage as proposed is needed. The analysis of residential parking needs near the site over the period between 2005 and 2018 found that without the project, there will be an increase of 1,966 residential units and a net decrease of 68 parking spaces. When the residential parking spaces. If the project as proposed is included, the study area would have a net increase of 2,392 apartment units, almost 2,400 units, and a net increase of 116 residential parking spaces. This represents a parking to dwelling unit ratio of 5%, well below the 20% of both automobile ownership and the maximum as-of-right parking in the Manhattan core. Board 5 voted not to issue a recommendation on this application, noting conflicting positions on the possible benefits or detriments of the parking. The borough president, in her recommendation, noted that while the application may very well meet the findings for the special permit, she had concerns about the possible use of the garage for transient purposes. In the end, the record shows that a larger garage is both needed and appropriate. The need is at the minimum demonstrated by the fact that between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., it will be more than 90% occupied by building and neighborhood residents. It is appropriate because the business community, and in particular the area's theaters, hotels, and restaurants, may benefit from the availability to visitors of a few spaces in the garage during the day. And you can see that in the letters of support that we've received from the Broadway League and the Schubert Organization, which were distributed to the Commission this morning. So we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Questions for Mr. Selver?
Mr. Silver, you indicated that between 6 PM and 8 AM, this building would be 90% occupied by area residents.
Mhm.
How do you know that?
Well, the garage, the secret analysis of the garage looked at its occupancy, and I think what I may want to do here is defer on methodology to the people who conducted that, but looked at the occupancy of the garage over 24 hours, how many vehicles came in and out during each hour, and between up to 8 a.m., there are about 171 vehicles in the garage out of 184 spaces. There are a couple of vehicles that leave that would be people who were there. And those are people, the cars are there either because people are living or in the building or nearby. And then after 6, again, you have 169 spaces, and the number goes up over the next couple of hours. It's only during the midday period that you get some reduction, and those are people who take their cars out to do whatever they do. They may be reverse commuting, they may be doing something else.
Well, my conundrum on this application is that, as you well know, this provision in the Manhattan Core parking regulations was intended to provide parking for residents. And this garage is in the heart of the theater district. And the letters of support and other testimony we've received from people who are not, clued into what the special permit requires tell us that this is theater district parking, that it is for theater goers and people staying in hotels who need to park in that area. The parking study draws a 1/3 mile radius for the study area, which is what the rules say is appropriate. We picked that back in 2013 because evidence suggested that people are willing to walk 1/3 of a mile to find a parking space in relation to their residence. But the new development, the new residential development within the study area, that is the partial basis for the calculation of the ratio here, is far west of this site. And I submit that no rational resident living on 10th Avenue is going to rent a parking space on 53rd Street in the theater district. So I think we have a situation here where the rules this garage just does not seem to me to be needed for residential growth, which is what this special permit is all about. Not so much a question, I guess, as a statement at this point.
I guess my answer to that is that for better or for worse, when city planning adopted this text, they recognized that all garage spaces might not be used by residents of the building. And they also, and therefore they allowed people who do not live in the building to use the garage. We felt that looking at the growth, looking at the number of apartments that have been developed in the past 10 years, some of which are over by 10th Avenue, but some of which are in the 7th to 8th or 9th Avenue corridor and run from 57th Street south, that there are a sufficient number of apartments to generate the demand for the parking. And the analysis that was done for Secret determined that during the evenings, the garage would be full, and that's not full of people who are coming to the theater or coming and going from their offices. That's full of people who are there. And that indicates to us that there is a need for the parking and the need for the spaces.
Okay, well, so we'll get more information from the seeker folks. Do you happen, there's a large residential building adjacent to this site, recently developed, I believe, with a large garage. Do you know what the parking experience in that garage is? Is it full of residents as you submit, or?
I would defer to the consultants as to which buildings, as to conditions in different garages.
Thank you.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. Are any of the spaces leased on a monthly basis by the building tenants, or will they be?
They will, we're assuming they will be. I mean, we expect they will be, and
In your calculation, how many of those, or any
again, I
building owners?
think it's a better
have
question
additional-
addressed to the environmental and traffic folks, because they're the people who did the study, and they know the ins and the details of it better than I.
Well, I actually think it might be the owner's question.
And we actually do
You have the
have
owner?
the
Great.
applicant's questions for Mr. Selver
I
first.
mean, look, what we know is, this is going to be a market rate building. It means the rents are going to be fairly high. We know that more than 20%, and in some cases, close to 30% of the households, when you get above $50,000 a year in Manhattan, own automobiles. So by that standard, we would expect that somewhere around 100, 125 of the people who live in the building would own automobiles. It would be most logical for them to garage them here, but we can't say for sure.
Other questions for
Thank
Mr.
you.
Selver? Commissioner Cirillo.
I'm not sure if it's so much a question, but just a thought. And I just trying to put the perspective on this. And what you're seeking is an increase in parking for the accessory purpose, the residential purpose. You're not seeking public parking. I just want to be clear on this, because there's a different point of view on what could or may or may not happen, because obviously there are different licenses required for these different uses from agencies other than ours. But can you just explain specifically what the applicant expects or intends to use the parking for? Because we're not saying that out loud, and I think that's important to know, because I may have a very different point of view on this. I'm not an anti-parking lot guy. In fact, I think that, especially in an area like the theater district, we want to get people out of their cars, because I don't know the last time anybody has driven through the theater district, but if you want to make curtain, you want to get out of your car if you've come in and spend your money in the city, in Midtown, and see Broadway. But at the same time, I think I need to be clear on what's really the intention, because it does change a little bit how to analyze this.
Well, I think the garage analysis was analyzed as though it were open to the public, and as though some visitors would come during the day, because there would be spaces available during the day. It did not assume, as some residential analyses assume, that the only reason that people would move their cars would be to go to their country houses over the weekend, or you know, maybe a few do reverse commuting. This was a more conservative set of assumptions. And it was, I mean, it was based on the fact that there seemed to be a need for at least the number of parking spaces that were offered from the residential standpoint, and that's the way your permit works, frankly, in terms of finding. But during the day, there would be spaces available, and we did not want to formally preclude the use of those spaces by transients, even though I might say, as an accessory garage, we could accept transients, because that's the way your permit also works. And we thought that it was appropriate in that context to do an environmental analysis that reflected the way we thought the garage would actually...
The broadest case scenario.
Yeah, the worst case, as
they call it,
the
the
secret
worst.
folks say. So I think it's fair to say that in terms of expectations, the expectation is that it's going to be predominantly a residential garage. As you know, under the multiple dwelling law, if a resident of the building wants a space, they have the absolute, and I think maybe even under the zoning resolution, they have an absolute right to go to the owner and say, I want a monthly space, and that space becomes theirs. So if enough people in the building wanted spaces, it would become essentially a garage for the entire building. Right. We just think in analytic terms, and we think in real world, that's not the way it's going to operate, at least initially. we also think, you know, I will also say, at the risk of being a complete heretic, that a lot of people come to the theater district. A lot of people come to Manhattan for entertainment or shopping or pleasure purposes by automobile. That is a reality. And as parking spaces decrease, the number of parking spaces decrease, parking is going to get to be more expensive. In the end, that is potentially a problem for businesses in the city. They'll also get to be less convenient. Having some replacement spaces, not a lot, but some, and this is not a lot, is, I would argue to you, sound public policy.
Well, I appreciate that, and I can't say that I disagree with sort of your thought process on that. That's not to prejudge the application or future applications. It's a case-by-case basis, but I tend to share that philosophy about how we market New York City, and particularly in this area, which is obviously such a critical element of our economy and makes New York City what it is, and that we have many, many people in our city and in our region who, despite the efforts of enhancing public transportation, still don't have public transportation or will still choose to use their vehicles, and that there is an expectation that the city provides the opportunity for people. I've never believed that if you build it, they will come when it comes to a parking garage. I think people come expecting it has been built. And so it's a very interesting issue, but I appreciate your candor on that, because it does, it requires a different approach to how this is, at least for me, in how this is viewed. It's not about pretending that this is all for residential people, you know, it's not. It's about, is this a place potentially for some activity that would be better described as public or transient parking? And so that's clear. But I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Sulver? We also have here to answer questions the applicant, Jeff Rubin, if commissioners would like to ask questions.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Sulver.
Good morning, Chair Lago. Good morning, Commissioners. Let me just clarify for the record. My name is Jeff Rubin. I'm a planner with Philip Abib and Associates. I'm working for the applicant, but not the applicant per se. I can answer questions about the EAS and also about the parking findings study. And then another colleague of mine is here to also answer questions more about the technical side of the garage.
Questions from the commission for Mr. Rubin. Commissioner Delauze.
So can you just walk us through a bit on the assumptions on the utilization of the garage and whether or not you could, the monthly versus, let's just say hourly, because I think that's some indicator of what might be residential versus more commercial in nature.
So, yes, let me present the assumptions and then you have questions. So, being that it's a parking garage in the base of a residential building, 426 apartments, and being that it's a special permit for residential growth, the analysis starts with the presumption that, as the other study has shown, that there is the growth of parking in this area relative to the growth of new dwelling units has been quite low. In fact, the parking supply has decreased. So there is an assumption in the EAS that the parking garage is 100% full overnight with residents. Then the question becomes, and I'll deal with weekdays first because I think it's just a little easier to think about, how many of those residents are likely to use their car during a weekday? And we looked at census data, and we looked at ownership rates, and we found that approximately, and this is probably high, and as you know, EASs should be kind of on the high end of the reasonable assumptions, that about 30% of people who would park their cars in this garage overnight would take their car out for one or more trips during a weekday. People leaving the garage
the morning or even later in the day, opens up some spots, which would then allow, we heard before about transient users, public users. As spaces open up, about 1/3 of the 184 spaces open up, that would allow some opportunity for people who are visiting the area for any number of reasons to shop, commuters, and of course, theater goers. I think in our study, it's more consistent with people who are coming in during the day. So you could think of them, I mean, theaters also have matinees on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. I think it's more likely, if this is a heavily residentially oriented garage, as we assume, that the transient use is more during the day, and that in the evening, residents are returning, which means that there's not that many opportunities, quite frankly, for evening theater goers. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. you're welcome.
Commissioner Levin.
Except that reveals the circular nature of this process. You start by assuming what has to be true in order for this permit to be granted. This permit, I'm reading from the zoning resolution, can be given where such parking facility serves the parking needs of a predominantly residential development. So you start by assuming that all residents, that all the parking is going to be taken up by residents. But we really don't know whether that is, I mean, it kind of defies common sense for those of us who spend much time in the theater district, that can be true. So what assurance can you give us that that's a reasonable assumption?
I don't want to be too argumentative, but I think that there is evidence that parking garages that are in residential buildings tend to be more oriented toward residents. The applicant, I can only go so far in speaking on his behalf, but one of the selling points, if you will, for people who will be renting apartments in this building will be the availability of parking. So at the very least, they're going to be interested in making a garage that is, in a sense, serving residents because they want to try to, it's sort of a selling point for apartment rentals in this building.
Do you know anything, the application mentions that immediately to the west of the development site at 888 8th Avenue, there's a 370-unit apartment building that includes a public parking garage with approximately 170 spaces. Is that a market rate building? Do you know anything about that?
I'm sorry, I don't. I mean, that building, I believe, we didn't, our study and the other part of this, my work on this, goes back to 10 years prior to when the application was started, which was 2015, so we went back to 2005. That building, I'm pretty sure, predates 2005, so I don't know much about the particulars of that building, although it is a residential building.
So where my thought process is going is to try and understand how many spaces in that garage are taken up, are in fact taken up by residents, which would go a long way to supporting the assumption that you've made here.
Yeah, I understand your point. As you probably know, the parking study that we did for the application, nor the EAS specifically does utilization studies. One of the, when the Manhattan Core study was done several years ago, there does seem to be a higher, that residential garages have a different pattern to them than garages that are very heavily oriented towards garages that serve things like the theater district or things like Madison Square Garden. And some of this can be reflected in things like the prices and how many monthlies they sell, but I'm sorry, I don't have access to that information.
Commissioner Arcon.
I was arriving at the same place. There hasn't been a traffic study presented to us that Philip Habib hasn't done in this area since I've been on this commission. As an expert, could you tell us what the utilization rate is by renters and market rate apartments for in-house garages?
It's anecdotal. I would say that having done, as you said, we do have done parking utilization studies, and they're not completely reliable because we don't actually get to go inside the garage and inspect them, so it's more talking to parking attendants. But I would say that when they're in residential buildings, the utilization usually is over 50%. I'm not going to say it's always 100%, but it's a majority use. Whereas I know that, for example, if you go to certain parking garages that are close to Madison Square Garden, a lot of them at midnight are empty because a lot of them gear themselves towards, whether it's a concert or the New York Knicks or the New York Rangers, they're going for that kind of clientele, whereas parking garages in residential buildings, often because they want to serve the residents of their building, can't really, it's kind of a conflicting time pattern between the two types of users. So I don't have hard numbers for you, but I would say the residential buildings are usually well utilized. I can't always say 100%, but well utilized overnight.
Please.
And then there was a question I had for the applicant, but I gather this is our representative of the applicant in this regard, which is really what the pricing is intended to be between the hourly versus the monthly resident parking, because that would solve a lot of the mysteries I think some of us have.
And I don't have that information, I'm sorry.
But we can take follow-up written materials that can address on questions that aren't answered here.
Yes.
Other questions for Mr. Rubin? Yes, Commissioner Cantor.
With respect to that issue, the number of spaces available to unit owners or unit renters can easily be controlled by the monthly fee. And if the monthly fee becomes prohibitive, you've got nothing left but a public parking garage. And where are we?
Well, I think I'm going to punt, and as the chair suggested, I think we can respond in writing. I'm sorry, but I think it's better to do
Yeah, that would be much appreciated. Other questions for Mr. Rubin? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
I'm going to pose Commissioner Efron's question in a different way. You know, of the 426 market rate dwellings, what's your experience of, what percent of residents typically tend to have cars in this kind of situation?
We have looked at census data for this immediate area, and we also looked at the Manhattan Core study showed. And I think that the census data shows about a quarter, 25%. So this, and so we're talking for a 426 unit building, a little over 100 vehicles would be reasonable to assume by census data. And of course, the whole premise of the residential growth is that there's, there have been 24 new buildings that are either completed or under construction in this area within the last 10 plus years, and only 3 of those 24 buildings have provided parking. So, again, I think that was sort of the guiding idea of the residential growth special permit. So 100 or so could come from this building, and then the rest would come from other buildings that have no parking at all.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Rubin? Thank you.
Right, thank you.
We now have another representative of the applicant, Seth Wright. And he is available for any questions from the commission.
Yes, hello, I'm Seth Wright with Philip Beeman Associates. I help design the garage. So if there are any questions about the reservoir spaces or stacker locations, then I'm your man.
Commissioner Levin.
I have a question that doesn't exactly go to this, but you're my only shot on this one. The building is largely under construction, so presumably the space has been set aside for the garage that your client hopes to build.
Correct.
What happens with the, if the special permit isn't approved at the requested number of spaces, what happens to the already constructed space?
So the space is exactly the same with the special permit, without the special permit. We've added stackers. The DOB has approved the as-of-right number in the space as shown. So the special permit would add stackers and increase the capacity in that way. So, but the area is exactly the same for the permitted number.
Okay, so you take out the stackers and still use all the space?
Still use all the space, and the garage is under construction, like you said, and the permitted number is what's shown in there. And DOB has accepted that as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. So you could answer it after all.
Good, again. I've been doing it 20 years. So
Other questions for Mr. Wright? Thank you. We now have a number of speakers against. Sorry, Paul, one bite at the apple. The first speaker in opposition is Geraldine Johnson. Ms. Johnson?
Okay, good morning. Morning. Okay, my name is Geraldine Johnson, and I am a building service worker, a SEIU 32BJ union member, and a resident from Queens. I'm here today testifying on behalf of my union, SEIU 32BJ, the largest property service workers union in the country. We understand that the developers, Roseland Ballroom Associates, are seeking a special permit to develop a 184-space parking garage at 242 West 53rd Street. We also know they are in the process of developing a 426-unit apartment building at the same site. I am here today to urge the City Planning Commission to make sure they develop responsibly. One important thing to consider is the kind of building service jobs this building will provide to the community. Building service jobs can be jobs that pay $10 an hour with no benefits, or they can be good quality jobs that pay wages that allow people to afford to put a roof over their heads, save for retirement, and access health benefits. The developers have provided good quality building service jobs elsewhere throughout the city, and 242 West 53rd Street should be no exception. This is why I urge the City Planning Commission to recommend that Roseland Ballroom Associates commit to creating high-quality building service jobs that pay the industry standard wage and provide health benefits at 242 West 53rd Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Any questions from the commission?
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now have another speaker in opposition, Jim Karras.
Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. I'm Jim Karras, General Counsel and Land Use Director, here on behalf of Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, to recommend disapproval of the special permit by Roseland Development Associates for an attended off-street parking garage in a proposed mixed-use building at 242 West 53rd Street in the Theater District. Recommendations from this office on prior parking special permits have continued to call on DCP and the City Planning Commission to consider a more robust set of factors aside from the parking methodology analysis, including the absolute availability of parking, the supply of parking prior to the 10-year look-back, and the current capacity and utilization rate of parking facilities in the neighborhood, and access to mass transit. What is especially problematic for this site is that while the parking study methodology clearly shows a loss in parking over the last 10 years and an increase in residential development, the garage is not actually intended to fill a gap for residential parking spaces. As Commissioner Levin pointed out, letters of support of the application from theater organizations argue on the merits of additional parking for theater goers. While the analysis of residential growth is done according to the Department of City Planning's guidelines, also as Commissioner Levin pointed out, the 1/3 mile radius of the study area in this case stretches to 10th Avenue, and it strikes me as very unlikely that parking in this location in the heart of the theater district would be appropriate for residents on 10th Avenue. We're also concerned that while we have limited comfort with the fact that monthly users tend to not use their cars on a regular basis, transient parking will exacerbate and potentially lead to additional pedestrian and vehicular conflict regardless of well-placed signage because of the theater district patronage. We're more of the mind that if you build them, they will come and bring their cars, and if you stop building them, eventually they'll get the idea in their head to stop bringing their cars. And we think that's what the Manhattan Core Parking Zoning Amendments sought to, that's why they sought to institute limits in public parking, which would over time reduce the overall number of public parking spaces. It was anticipated that with fewer parking spaces, there'd be fewer motor vehicles in Manhattan's most congested areas. Therefore, we think this is inappropriate. While nearby garages enjoy high utilization rates, we would also question the need for additional residential parking spaces given the adjacency of mass transit and the central location of this site. This neighborhood has a full suite of transit and travel options. We believe that in such a case, there is much less need for destination-based car storage for residents, and there are already alternatives to car travel. So even if these spaces were designated only for residential, we're not confident that that would be appropriate either. The applicant might very well meet the individual findings for a special permit pursuant to the zoning resolution. However, our office believes that the granting of additional parking spaces for commercial uses is inappropriate at this site, and that these findings are too narrowly focused and did not take into account the very important factor of access to mass transit. Excessive car congestion certainly has adverse effects on the character of Midtown Manhattan, and it is within the Commission's powers to act in order to minimize those adverse effects, and that's why we recommend denial of the permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karas. Questions from the commission? Thanks.
Thanks.
That is the last of the people who have registered. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak, either in favor or opposition? If not, then the public hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 27, Community District 4, N170251ZRM. A public hearing in the matter of an application for an amendment to the zoning resolution concerning the West 23rd Street text amendment.
Our first speaker is Andrew Rosen.
Thank you and good morning.
Proceed, Mr. Rosen.
My name is Andrew Rosen. I'm representing Related here for applicant 517 West 35th Street regarding a proposed text amendment to the zoning for site on 35th Street and 10th Avenue in the Hudson Yards District. We have a map over here. The district allows for development of commercial use first in a phased development, followed by residential development. And our proposal on this site is to create the opportunity to build the residential component of this development first, followed by office or commercial development on a second phase. This option is allowed in other areas of the neighborhood, which are larger sites, 69,000 square feet minimum. This site has a smaller footprint, but we still think achieves the same objectives based on the development plan that we have created over at the site. So the plan is here. We would have a 414,000 square foot primarily residential development along 10th Avenue. Followed by a commercial development between Hudson Boulevard and the mid-block on this site between 35th and 36th Streets. We understand that there are, this is a change, and one of the things that we are committed to here, as having spoken to the community board, is to utilize the affordable housing programs that are available. When we spoke to the community board, that program had not been yet created. We now have a new program. We're evaluating the specifics of that program and exactly what that means for this development site, but our early indications are that we'd be able to use that program on this development. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Rosen? Commissioner De La Hoz.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Rosen. Can you speak to the other part of the conversation you've been having with the community board about permanent affordability and where that stands given the new state law that helps get you partway there?
In general, we're still evaluating the new state law, which obviously is brand new. We are trying to understand exactly what the impacts are economically and how that can create the affordable housing. The requirements are now higher than they were under the old 421A plan. So we're looking at that. We have a ground lease on this parcel over at 35th and 10th, and so that is a constraint on the potential for development commitments beyond the tax abatement period of time.
So two follow-up questions. How long is the ground lease, and at what point in time do you think you'll be done with your analysis?
We're evaluating the options now. I can't tell you the exact timing on an answer for that. We could do within several weeks to understand the program and what we plan to build. Always subject to change depending on the market and what's happening here. And then in terms of the ground lease, I believe it's a 99-year ground lease.
So you may not be done with your analysis before the commission votes?
Possible.
Other questions for Mr. Rosen? Commissioner Levin?
Well, I'd just like to pursue Commissioner Deluz's line of questioning. The community board refers to another project that Related did in the neighborhood where they voluntarily committed to permanence beyond what was required by the financing programs they were using. I guess I'd ask, as part of your ongoing analysis, whether there are substantial differences between that site and this that would prevent you from making a similar commitment here. Related has done a tremendous quantity and quality of work in the neighborhood, and I think the community board has appreciated that partnership. It's unusual to ask a developer to make things permanently affordable, but Related has a track record of having done that. So I guess it'd be nice to understand what might be different here from the Caledonia and why that voluntary commitment shouldn't be made here too.
So obviously, thank you for your comments related history and track record on affordable housing date back to our roots in the 1970s, and we've been developing affordable housing in New York and for a very long time and in quite a quantity. We look to continue that commitment. That is always, a partnership really with the communities and with the government as we figure out, the programs that are available to us to enable that to happen. And there are a number that are available, and we're always looking to maximize those. So, I'm not ruling out, things that we've done in the past, but everything is unique to a site and the partnerships that are involved in those sites. And I can't stand here today and make a commitment beyond what, the programs that are out there today are, because simply, we are in a partnership on this, and I can't commit to the next level that Related may have done elsewhere.
Well, I guess I would ask, as your analysis evolves, before we have to vote on this, you can update us on your progress toward understanding the financing here and what kind of a commitment you can make. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Rosen? Commissioner Efron.
During the review session, where you may or may not have been present, there was some discussion about some economic reasons why it made sense to do this. Can you elaborate for us on that?
Sure, happy to. I mean, the main thing is, as of right under the zoning, we could build a commercial building on Hudson Boulevard and then afterwards a residential building on 10th Avenue. So that is one alternative that is out there. The reason we'd like to change that is we'd like to accelerate the creation of the housing and the affordable housing sooner than when we would be able to get a commitment and develop an office building here. This residential development would not be tenant dependent. And so as commercial development marches up the line from 30th Street and the overall plan for the district is coming to fruition here, likewise residential development is coming down from the north. And so we feel we're at a point in time where we can develop this residential building now and not make a contingent on awaiting a commercial tenant on a site which is over 35,000 feet, 39,000 square feet on this lot, which is a perfectly good office building floor plate for the future. So this really protects that option to build the office space over on the Hudson Boulevard side. Presuming we end up with office, I mean, it still could be hotel, but much more likely to be office here. If this didn't go through, we'd have to look at other options which may involve separate buildings and development that would not necessarily be in keeping with, the overall intent of an office district here.
And how can we have reassurance that that won't happen even with the residential going first?
I mean, it's a commercial zone, and the incentives are there in the district, to encourage the development that we think is right for the neighborhood. So I think those incentives are in place.
But you mentioned the hotel. So if the goal of part of this district is to make sure we have the right office floor plates in an ever-expanding city to meet our economic development needs, as I understood the text, which predated my membership on the commission, it was to make sure that the commercial was done first for that reason, as a protection to make sure it was office space.
Hotel's still allowed under the commercial zoning. So, I mean, like I said, I think the incentives and the parcels and the way that the lots are set up here incentivizes office development here, and I don't know that any additional protections are required in order to ensure that.
May I ask one other question? Are there any other office buildings you're currently developing within the Hudson Yards district?
Yes, we have quite a number, down on our main site at between 30th and 33rd. We've developed several, and we have several more in the pipeline. We'll continue to be developing office for a long time in this district.
And what's the aggregate square footage of those?
I can get you the total, but we have built over, I believe, 6 million feet in construction or completed of office space in the neighborhood.
Thanks.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, were you to build, as hopefully you will, a commercial office building there, what do you estimate would be the square footage of that building?
So the parcel on Hudson Boulevard that remains here would be a 950,000 square foot zoning site, I think 948,000 feet. So it's a sizable office building.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Rosen? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is David Karnofsky.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. David Karnofsky, Fried Frank, Land Use Counsel to the applicant for the zoning text amendment. I'll be brief. Most of the points have been addressed. But the text amendment is designed to facilitate the phased development that Andy Rosen described to you, consisting of two buildings, a residential building, a predominantly residential building first, and a commercial building second. This requires an amendment to the phasing regulations of Hudson Yards because in the first instance, these regulations currently provide that in order to develop residential use in this sub-area, one must first develop 18 FAR worth of commercial use. The regulations do allow for phased development, but in each phase, the ratio of commercial to residential has to be 3-to-1, which essentially precludes the ability today to build a predominantly residential building first. The only exception to this regime is currently with respect to zoning lots of 69,000 square feet or more. And the applicant is seeking to allow the development site, which is smaller than that, but in excess of 55,000 square feet, to enjoy the same type of flexibility. Under the text within sub-area A3, which is here, a fully residential or predominantly residential building could be built first, followed at a later date by a larger commercial building, provided that at least 35,000 square feet of lot area is reserved for commercial development in the later phase. We think this particular change to the phasing regulations is appropriate for sub-area A3. A3 is located to the north of A2, which is the sub-area that allows for up to 33 FAR, only 6 of which can be used for residential development, and clearly this is the area designed for high-density commercial building, the highest density commercial buildings in Hudson Yards. A3 is located to the south of D1, which allows for a maximum of 15 FAR, with 12 allowed for residential, and it's located to the west of D4, which allows for a maximum of 6.5 FAR with a residential maximum of 6.2. So it's, in a sense, in a transition area between the areas that are zoned for the highest commercial density development on the one hand and predominantly residential building on the other, and in allowing for 6 of the 24 FAR in sub-area A3 to be used for residential purposes, it allows for a kind of residential commercial mix that falls in between what its neighbors allow and lends itself to the kind of phasing that I think we're proposing here. The development site itself, with its frontage on 10th Avenue and Hudson Boulevard East, is well suited for this limited expansion of the flexible phasing that currently is only allowed for the largest sites, because it would allow for an initial development of the predominantly residential building on 10th Avenue across from Hell's Kitchen subdistrict, and a second phase of development of a large commercial building on Hudson Boulevard East. The result would not in any way change the overall amount of development, which would remain 24 FAR. Instead, the text amendment would simply allow for a change of phasing for the site's development.
Thank you, Mr. Karnofsky. Questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Delahoo's.
First, I just want to say thank you for coming and clarifying. I'm sure you had a hand in designing things to begin with. I'm just wondering how many other zoning lots could be impacted by this change within the subdistrict?
This is the only one. This is the only one that meets the criteria of being larger than 55,000.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Karnofsky. Our next speaker in support is Betty McIntosh.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Betty McIntosh. I'm a member of Community Board 4 and co-chair of the Chelsea Land Use Committee. You probably are wondering why I should be testifying about the proposed text amendment for 517 West 35th Street, which is in Hell's Kitchen. Jesse Bodine, our district manager, will be speaking after me and directly focus on that text amendment. I am here to remind you about a commitment that Related made last January to provide affordable housing units in connection with those lost with when a residential building at 500 West 28th Street was demolished. You may recall in January 2017 you received a letter from Community Board 4 recommending denial of a small text amendment to facilitate a mixed residential commercial building on the U-Haul site on West 23rd Street in the special West Chelsea district, unless Related agreed to conditions to make up for the loss of affordable housing units caused by the demolition of 500 West 28th Street. Community Board 4 acknowledges that in addition to luxury development, Related is a major provider of affordable housing in Community District 4. We appreciate Related's cooperation over the years on those projects. Unfortunately, Related demolished a 4-story, 6-unit residential building at the corner of 10th and 28th Street in the special district. A filing error resulted in the Department of Buildings issuing a demolition permit. This is only one example of a pattern of false or misleading statements by applicants regarding demolition restrictions in special districts that have led to the loss of approximately 100 units of affordable housing in our special districts. Related has responded with a creative plan to offset the loss of affordable units and has been working with HPD to draft the final documents to implement that plan. However, the agreement will not be in place by the time the City Council votes on the text amendment for the U-Haul site on 23rd Street. Community Board 4 urges the Commission to remind the City Council and HPD that a solution for the loss of affordable units at 500 West 28th must be in place before the 517 West 35th Street text amendment is approved by the City Council. Thank you for your consideration of this matter.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh. Any questions from the commission?
Thank you.
Thank you. We now have another speaker in support. Thank you. Jesse Bodine.
Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. First off, I'd like to excuse my appearance. Joe Restuccia, who is our co-chair of our housing committee, was going to speak today, but unfortunately he could not make it due to a minor medical emergency. He is fine, but unable to come today. So I was pulled from the bench about an hour. Oh, thank you. Manhattan Community Board 4 reviewed the presentation by Related Companies for 517 West 35th Street and voted to support the zoning text amendment that will allow residential construction to begin prior to the commercial construction with conditions. CB4 supports the proposed text amendment to allow residential development prior to commercial development with a decreased commercial footprint requirement. That support, however, is conditioned upon the developer's provision of permanently affordable housing at 517 West 35th Street, a condition which the Manhattan Borough President's Office has also supported. During Related's presentation and subsequent correspondence to CB4, Related stated that they would be seeking an 80-20 tax-exempt bond financing, which would require that 20% of the units be residential rental building, in the residential building be affordable. and that as long as the proposed development receives a 421A real estate tax exemption, those affordable units required under that real estate tax exemption would be permanently affordable. The residential portion of this proposed development will contain approximately 400 residential apartments. Approximately 80 affordable units will come online in around 2019. By voluntarily making the units in the proposed development permanently affordable, the proposed text amendment will affect the same action related took at the Caledonia at 450 West 17th Street. This action is consistent with the public policy set forth in the Hudson Yards Points of Agreement to create permanently affordable housing. CB4 requests that related voluntarily make the residential units in the proposed development permanently affordable. Related also committed to designing the proposed 10th Avenue residential building so that the 10th Avenue street wall conforms with the adjacent building to the northeast corner of the block, and working with Con Edison to ensure the placement of the street vaults along 10th Avenue portion of the proposed development does not hinder the ability to plant trees along the sidewalk. In conclusion, CB4 looks forward to working with Related and other developers with this provision and the proposed zoning text amendment to make any 80-20 unit development to be permanently affordable.
Good job of pinch hitting, Mr. Bodine. Any questions?
Thank you.
Those are the last of the registered speakers. I would ask if there's anyone else present who would want to speak on this item. Then the hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 28, 29, and 30. Community District 6, number 28, C170187ZMM. Number 29, N170186ZRM. Number 30, N170186A, ZRM, a public hearing in the matter of application for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning the Greater East Midtown project. A public hearing is being held by the City Planning Commission in conjunction with the above ULURP hearings to receive comments related to a draft environmental impact statement. This hearing is being held pursuant to State Environmental Quality Review Act and the City Environmental Quality Review Procedures. The record will show that Commissioner Cirillo is recused on this matter.
And our first speaker in support is Deputy Mayor Alicia Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all, the commissioners, for being here today. I am going to keep my remarks pretty brief today so that you can actually benefit from the perspective of all the other members of the public and other elected officials. The last time I was here before the commission was at last year's hearing on our mandatory inclusionary housing and zoning for quality and affordability programs. And those were two really foundational policies that will help us confront, in many respects, the biggest crisis facing New Yorkers, regular New Yorkers, the cost of housing. But today I'm here to talk about something that's equally as important to the administration, and that is to talk about what I think most of us would argue or acknowledge is the best business address in the world, and that's East Midtown, globally recognized as the place for doing business in New York, and our plan to keep it that way. As you know, Greater East Midtown is the city's premier central business district, and it really is dependent on two key pillars, I think, that makes it that way. One is the extraordinary access to mass transit and the vertical density, the fact that it is such a vertically dense and compact central business district. And even with the creation of very successful other business districts in the city, like Hudson Yards, like the renewal of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan District, the development of the downtown Brooklyn Business District, and now Long Island City, nothing actually really compares to East Midtown, either in its size as a business district or even more importantly, in its economic value to the city. The area currently generates 10% of the city's real estate taxes and contains over 60 million square feet of office space. It is currently responsible or home to 250,000 jobs and is home to several Fortune 500 companies. But for anybody who's had the luck, I guess, or the opportunity to take a trip recently to London or Shanghai or Hong Kong, you can see that the challenges that we're facing are very clear. Our transit infrastructure isn't just old. I mean, it is old, but it's also reached capacity or well over capacity in some of its most critical segments. And the average age of East Midtown's buildings is 70 years old. And again, very, very different to what you see in other global financial capitals. So new construction is necessary to deliver Class A office space, accommodate both the tenants of today that are actively looking for space, but also really to think about the tenants of the future and what kind of space and building typologies they are going to need to grow their businesses here in New York. So we have an obligation and an opportunity to really solidify East Midtown's position as the premier 21st century office district. And again, I say this because although New York City is the financial capital of the world, we have to be proactive to continue to be competitive on a global scale. So the proposals you seek to address, the proposal today and over the next couple of weeks, really do seek to address that challenge of long-term global competitiveness and supporting economic growth. First of all, I really want to commend Borough President Gail Brewer and Councilmember Garodnick and all of the stakeholders who have devoted what is literally years and years to informing this zoning proposal. And I think it's fair to say that that level of collaboration is pretty remarkable and something we should all be very proud of. And as a result of that collaboration, the chief elements of this plan, designated improvements to public transit, investments in streetscapes, protection of landmarks, and incentives to modernize outdated office buildings and increase density where it's appropriate, have really achieved a remarkable degree of consensus in a town where that is rare, let's be honest. So behind all of this is a principle that is very similar to what we established under mandatory inclusionary housing. We believe that growth is necessary to keep New York City affordable and competitive, but we also believe that allowing increased density and economic value to be created for the private sector should yield commensurate public benefits. So just as MIH compels market rate residential development to deliver affordable housing in real time, the East Midtown Plan requires development sites benefiting from greater as-of-right density to finance very specific transit improvements, facilitate the preservation of landmarks that have been unable to monetize their often landlocked development rights, and to invest in the area's pedestrian realm. We also estimate that the proposed action could create about 28,000 new permanent high-paying jobs and over 23,000 construction jobs over the next 2 decades. And again, this is really important. These goals are going to be achieved without using precious public dollars while also increasing tax revenue to the city through the provision of this greater development capacity. That is a radical departure from many traditional economic development strategies because there will be no tax breaks or subsidy to support this plan. This plan also requires that the improvements happen in real time, are paid for, and complete in order for the builders of these buildings to get certificates of occupancy that they will need to take advantage of the increased density. And the good thing about this is that we know it works. We know that the deals still pencil because we've tested this on the Vanderbilt corridor, which enabled the development of One Vanderbilt, a 57-story office tower across from Grand Central Terminal that is contributing more than $220 million in transit and pedestrian enhancements. You can walk through Grand Central Station right now and actually see in real time these investments beginning to happen on the mezzanines and the entrances. Now, key to achieving the goals of the Greater East Midtown Plan is determining an appropriately sized contribution to the Public Realm Improvement Fund. I truly do appreciate the feedback that we've received from all sides on this issue, and I do know there's an agreement in principle that we need to end up in a place where the contribution is neither too high to inhibit development and therefore be unable to deliver on the public realm improvements, nor so low that the very improvements that we need to deliver can't be funded. So this, again, is a delicate balancing act, and we continue to work on a solution. And that's why we are talking to everybody, analyzing our methodology, and we also recognize that because of the limited number of recent transactions, it is going to pose a challenge for us. But I don't think it's a challenge that we won't be able to solve, and we have to make sure that we get it right. Because again, if the premise of the plan is to make sure that we have the funding necessary to provide the transit improvements, we really have to make sure that there is, in fact, enough funding to do it, because the public deserves what we claim we're going to give them. Again, I think in this period of very, very complex global political uncertainty and really difficult structural change, things going on, obviously in Europe with Brexit and really tumultuous financial markets, it is very important that New York City proactively invest in our financial services districts and in East Midtown as our premier business district. And we look forward to that district being a great 21st century district. Great subway stations, better sidewalks, places for people to have lunch, spectacular landmarks dotted in between wonderful architecture. We really need to be a city that can both be friendly to transportation, friendly to pedestrians, friendly to business, and support new Class A office buildings rising in order to support the city's economic base. So this is the beginning of a process. I want to thank you all for the tremendous amount of work you've done, and I know that at the end of the day, it's going to be a product that we can all be really proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Glenn. Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Dweck.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure if you received we just received the comments that Councilmember Garodnick will be speaking later.
Okay.
So he has some concerns. He lists several concerns. While I believe he's in favor of the project in general, but he lists 8 or 9 concerns that still are in process of being worked out. And this is our second pass at the East Midtown rezoning. What can you, if you can? I'm not sure you've had an opportunity to review it yet, as I haven't either.
Okay. But we'll do our best, he's here, I believe, so
Yeah, right there.
he, I'm sure, will have many things to say. Okay, there you are. Oh my God, there's Dan. Okay.
Can you just
I'll give
assure
it-
us that you'll be working in tandem with the council member to resolve these issues so that this time it gets passed and?
No, but I think, where I started is, again, this has been a process that has been remarkably collaborative. It's probably sad that I have to say how remarkable it is, but certainly Councilman Garodnick and my office, as well as the Brewer's office and the community board, have spent literally 2 years working through a series of very complex issues, all with the same goals in mind. Like in any process, there are still some outstanding issues that we're going to be addressing, and I think it's fair to say, and I hope the councilman will affirm this, that it is really in a spirit of cooperation and collaboration to figure out how to get this across the finish line. As I've said, both publicly, this is a moment to do this, right? There is no margin for error here in terms of not getting something together that everybody feels comfortable with and that we can adopt and move forward to really set a blueprint for the 21st century of East Midtown. And now is the time to do it, and I think there's an extraordinary amount of goodwill to make sure we can work through these remaining issues.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Cantor.
Thank you. Good presentation, boss.
Boss, I like that. Okay. I feel that all the time. Go ahead.
Question. I heard you refer to a tie-in to the CO in terms of performance. I imagine that those people who are going to be developing these areas are what we would consider the premier developers in the New York area. And on a point-by-point basis, I am not trying to diss these guys. I would ask that you consider, rather than the permanent CO, the TCO as a threshold. We're talking about very tall buildings which are easily occupiable in stages. And as you know from past history, there have been times where TCOs have lasted for years and years. So I would argue that if it were possible to incorporate the TCO as a kickoff rather than the CO.
I think that's a fair point and something that we should do a little more work on, because especially when the buildings do get opened up in chunks, it does raise some administrative and practical issues, and also in terms of the tenancy and the financing of the building. But I think you're right, and we will spend some time making sure that we have as tight a nexus between the density bonus and the occupancy as we can reasonably assure.
Other questions? Commissioner Efron.
Thank you very much for your remarks. Already with One Vanderbilt, there's been a lot of excitement within the restaurant industry about new restaurants coming in that are not just for visitors, but also for residents of New York City. Is there anything that either Small Business Services or EDC will be doing to encourage more of that sort of evening activity in the neighborhood?
Once again, you always make my head think wider about all of the goals. In all honesty, I don't think we spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship of the what we know will be really interesting ground floor retail and restaurant and food uses, but I think that's a fair point, and we should think about it. And we have a restaurant and food services industry partnership that have a lot of the major restaurateurs and some of the smaller restaurateurs who are already working with us on a bunch of issues. So I'll ask my staff to talk to them about it, and also talk to city planning about whether there are any other mechanisms that may help us assure that we have enough food, not just for the workers, but also residents and obviously tourists. It's an interesting ecosystem, sort of all the food, sort of uses you'd want to have in the district. So good flags.
Other questions? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Glenn.
Thank you.